like a pivotal moment for me with Scotty B just being like, yeah, that's the point. He doesn't sound like y'all. And like, this is how you get shit out. It popped off. I saw kids getting laid out, like nitrous tanks everywhere. And I was just kind of like, I grew up as a raver and y'all are still making me blush. What Stretch and Bobbito represent is this like, you know, quintessential, just like fucking New York hip hop in its best, most purest form. Like real New York DJs want to play this shit. That's crazy. So like, I remember Cosmo Baker played his first Serato set of all time. Those were just the people that got kicked out. There was still like a rack of influential motherfuckers like still in a very tightly packed small beauty bar.
Hey there, it's me, Roxy Cottontail. You might know me as a DJ, artist, designer, and New York City party promoter, or from my bunny logo. I'm putting all that on the table and writing about the years that transformed music and the New York City scene. I've interviewed 250 friends and colleagues I admire. I ask all and reveal all. Please join me and the Tales to rediscover the 90s and the Y2K magical landscape of music, art, technology, and streetwear. This is Roxy's Tales.
My name's Tittsworth, Jesse Tittsworth. It's my last name, as DJ Ayers likes to call me, Big Titty McGillicuddy.
My guest this week on Roxy's Tales is DJ Tittsworth, a true architect of modern nightlife culture. Hailing from DC, he's the force behind TNA Records, Hermanito Records, U Street Music Hall in DC, and now the visionary behind the venue Crybaby in Oakland. From the pulse of the DMV to dance floors across the country, Tittsworth has always championed community, sound, and the spirit of the underground. His deep love for music culture is something that connected us instantly, and his dedication to the craft makes him a hero of mine. Without further ado, DJ Tittsworth.
And when did you start DJing, and were you always DJing under this moniker?
I've kind of gone through a few different renditions of it. I tried to make it simple initially and called myself DJ Tits. Not a very PC way of doing it, even though it had two T's in it and was in my last name. But for the most part, just kind of stuck to the last name for most of it. I started DJing in like the mid to late 90s, doing a very poor job of trying to mix hip hop records. And then kind of became known as a drum and bass DJ for about 7 to 10 years, playing a bunch of raves, like in the sort of warehouse era of, 90s and early 2000s DC, which led to Baltimore, which led to you.
Were you doing like Buzz and Fever or?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. A lot of those rooms for sure.
Awesome.
Just anywhere I could, those were some of the, like the legit ones. There were ones in sort of Baltimore that were like, ran off of generators. And, we came up in an era where it was like, some of those raves were like run by organized crime. And it was just like this weird, like Wild West approach to things,
Yeah.
And that definitely like kind of led me up the East Coast too. And I think it was like early 2000 though, when it was like Baltimore Club kind of happened, just, for guys like me and Dave and all that kind of stuff. Like we just started messing with it because we heard it on the radio and we loved it. Like I happened to kind of be like seated in this place in Maryland where I could turn on one station and get Baltimore Club, turn on other station and listen to Go-Go. So even though like they were kind of at odds with each other as a community, both of them would definitely like inspire me. So I just started like messing around with club just as a result of just being tired of really serious rave music, and just like, I think accidentally did it right around the time Holotronics was doing something similar. And this sort of just like family kind of impromptu family kind of snapped together, I think that's why originally drum and bass was a little easier for me to gravitate towards, because like I wasn't comfortable being a full on raver yet. And I was like, no, I'm a tough guy. I like hood shit. And like, I grew up on Discord bands and like, yeah, I would sneak out and go, to the old 930 Club and the old Black Hat and stuff like that. So I think that's why like drum and bass was like a good gateway to me. But then when I was like discovering Scotty B and what those guys were doing, they would mix like Detroit house records with a dance rock record, with a hood ass club record, with the 3-6 Mafia record. I was like, oh, there's something here for me. Like, I don't have to polarize myself in all these different ways. It can all fit this bigger picture, right?
Yeah. What was your first residency in DC?
I mean, I was playing Buzz fairly regularly, but the one where I was just kind of like, I'm in charge of something, I'm doing something like every week, I'm curating lineups, was probably this place called The Edge. And I'm not sure if you were that familiar with it, but there was like, in that Southeast corridor, you had like a bunch of them, and it was right next to Buzz, basically.
Yeah.
It was kind of like Buzz was kind of already a free-for-all. The Edge was like even more so. It was just like this really cutty warehouse with like a pretty decent sound system and like a decent little deck. It was like an abbreviated Buzz. I think it was like once a week for a few months where like I was booking all the drum and bass lineups and all that kind of stuff, and like really kind of cutting my teeth on what it meant to like run it from the other side, before I even thought about being a club owner and all these other things. And then also that was my launching point to just being like, hey, tough guy, like this techno thing is pretty cool. And like, oh, this is DJ Assault. This is pretty cool. And this is DJ Funk. And, Carl Craig and like this, like all of a sudden I was just kind of like techno and all this music ceased to be just a simple metronome for me. And I started to really kind of get out there,
Yeah. How did you meet Dave? He told me his story.
I used to throw this party, like I said, when I got tired of just like really serious doom and gloom drum and bass. We threw this party in Bethesda, Maryland, which is was and still is a pretty, like, no disrespect, Bethesda, kind of like not exactly the coolest part of the DC area. But like we were living in the suburbs at the time, and we just wanted a space, and our friend kind of had the space. And long story short, I think the second one we tried to do, and by the way, the format of it was just like, it was basically Holotronics before we knew what Holotronics was. We're like, let's just do something open format and mix in all these influences that we like and just kind of see what happens. And it kind of blossomed from there. So the second one, I was like, yo, Dave, like you're gonna do this one, right? And he's like, yeah, cool, no problem. And he showed up and he hands me a business card that like he had like printed off his inkjet and like didn't have scissors. You could tell he was like trying to rip it out. And I was like, Dave, you already have the gig, man. Like, thank you or whatever. But anyways, like long story short, like I was like, the decks were there, go for it. And like he killed it, like within 15 minutes, he had like everybody dancing. And Dave, like especially like very like a very sexy sound, got the ladies going and all this kind of stuff. And like very quickly after that, we just had a couple drinks and just like instantly became like really, really, really good friends. And it was all love, and all that sort of initial awkwardness was gone. And shit, we were touring together internationally like a year or two after that. It was pretty incredible at the pace of things,
Yeah. And so what were you on any chats, forums, message boards prior or around the time of the Holotronics message board?
Just like growing up, especially just kind of being into weird like counterculture shit. None of that stuff was particularly foreign to me. So I was like in like these weird like chat rooms, like trading like industrial tapes like a long time ago when it was just all just text, right? Like the original Discord, if you will, is called IRC, right? And then just kind of like, I was kind of a nerdy kid, so like hacked myself onto the internet pretty early, and was just like, really trying to connect with people that were kind of into counterculture shit. Yeah, I mean, like the technology side of things and message boards and messaging apps and like AIM and the AOL CD-ROMs and all that stuff is definitely like a romantic part of my upbringing. And which led like pretty naturally to Holotronics, which was like just a complete game changer and would like repivot a lot of our careers,
Yeah, so how did you become familiar with what was happening in Philly?
Dave had this idea. It was like started off as just like this really like just random kind of like cheeky DC thing. There was this like god awful car commercial that we used to all laugh at as Eastern Motors, with a terrible jingle that ripped off Shaggy, and like the lip syncing was off, and like the VHS tracking was off, and it was just abominable. But like we, just being from the area, we loved it. It's like the way that like it was like the last thing you would hear on TV before you crashed out or whatever, right? Dave would play the original commercial like at the end of his set sometimes, and it would pop off, and I'm just kind of like, well, somebody should do a club remix of this. So it was his idea. It was my first, actually I'd say my second attempt at club music ever. And long story short, like it like made its way to the car commercial, and they like invited me to be a part of shooting the follow-up commercial, and like met a bunch of Redskins, and Biz Marquee was there trying to get like gambling advice. Like it was kind of a surreal experience. But point being is, he was like, yeah, there's this thing called Holotronics, like holla who? And he's like, yeah, this guy Diplo. And it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but yeah, sure, let's try this, right? And long story short, like I uploaded it to that, realized that there was like this community that embraced what we did. I just kind of liked what it represented, because we were really, really into this local thing. And, maybe the last generation that kind of was, to be honest with you. But then you'd have people like Curtis Vodka or something like that would just like be from Alaska, never stepped foot into the Paradox, and really didn't know culturally what it came from, but was like doing like this really interesting, cool takes on it. So that was kind of like my step into that. What kind of prepped me for that is like, I remember when I first started doing like these like cheeky edits, and so not all of them were cheeky, but point being is like, I think I kind of just being an outsider had my own take on it. And originally a lot of Baltimore didn't really fuck with it. They were just kind of like, who's this white kid? He's not from here, or half white kid. And like it doesn't sound like us. It doesn't sound like Paradox music. And I remember like a pivotal moment for me was Scotty B just being like, yeah, that's the point. He doesn't sound like y'all. And like, this is how you get shit out, and this is how you make things interesting. And after he stuck up for guys like me and Dave, and then kind of like legitimized us, and then combining that with like what Holotronics kind of did exposure wise. And it was just off to the races after that. Not to get too like anti-authority about it, but it was before like these like giant machines learned how to recalibrate it. So like, you know, like those of us that were kind of early to this technology could do fun and interesting things and support the people and the cultures that we liked doing. And sure, like, you know, we also made some money and kept the lights on, but it wasn't necessarily about like, you know, Spotify metrics and maximizing this and that and the other, right? Yeah.
We were the algorithm, I guess you could say.
Exactly.
Do you remember where your first like gigs were outside of the DMV area?
You were a big part of that. Because, you know, I think like drum and bass days, it was like, I would go wherever you let me go. So that'd be like sometimes a full room in Philly, sometimes an empty one in New York, like that kind of like off and on sort of situation. But really like the two major moments were like you investing in club music and just being like, nah, you're coming to New York, you're going to play a party, there's going to be tastemakers there, you're going to network with people. That was a game changer. And then DJ Ayers kind of taking me under his wing and just being like, okay, this is the rub, this is how we party rock. And I think that, you know, our sort of our DJing style was fairly compatible too.
This is the old school one with Trackademics.
So like Trackademics, it's like, you know, ended up doing, you know, like being it's like such a fan, ended up doing like songs with the Federation, ended up like staying in touch with these guys. I live in the Bay now. You know what I mean? It's like just in a lot of ways things started to click. So I have you to thank for that quite a bit. And then, you know, like Ayers was the one that really showed me how to tour, you know, Papa Ayers. And I'm glad for it. There was a moment there, you know, like just, I think he kind of had a similar thing with A-Track. Like, I think it was the Sunglasses tour, you know, kind of going from DMC Trizzy and then just, you know, kind of converting things into this Holotronics world. And the early stops were Calgary was a big one. Calgary was kind of an anchor for Canada. You were an anchor for like the Northeast. Frankie in LA was a big one. We talked about Malmo, Sweden was just crazy because all of a sudden, you know, we would get a European anchor, and then, you know, like in a lot of ways, I think Sweet Fred was a tastemaker, like early to the Diplo situation, early to the MIA situation. Yeah. And then you had a big one for me was Sinden in the UK. Mm-hmm. So I remember the first time I ever played in the UK, it was this like really dodgy, like multi-room, like giant warehouse spot. I forgot what it was called. And I remember like I was so fucking nervous. Like it was one of the few times like I literally blacked out. Like I remember walking out to the stage and I remember hands being in the air. That's it. Like there was just like it was like a Frank the Tank muscle memory moment. And like I, you know, completely sober at the time. It was just like the stress of it all. And I was just kind of like, London is bananas. So like it popped off. I saw kids getting laid out, like nitrous tanks everywhere. And I was just kind of like, I grew up as a raver and y'all are still making me blush. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I remember afterwards, you know, this like very like, you know, confident but mild mannered, like, you know, British dude would walk up to me. He's like, hey, my name is Sinden. This was great, but you should maybe do this like for a proper venue. How do you feel about like playing Fabric next time? And just like my jaw just fucking hits the ground. You know what I mean? It's like, especially growing up as a drum and bass DJ, Fabric is like the holy land. It's like Mecca to us at that time. Not only did he book me in Fabric, he was like, yeah, come stay at my place. I'll take care of you on the off days. And, you know, like it just really, really rode for club culture. And that like introduced people like Scotty B to switch, and then like that introduced kick patterns that like changed the game and kind of influenced, like kind of pulled Bloghouse a little bit more American. And it was just like, yeah, it was just such an interesting moment in time, you know?
Oh, I love your take on it. That's great. This was a classic. Do you remember this?
Dude, there's a lot of my favorite people here.
Studio B.
Clever, I miss so much, and then anything that says Good People's on it automatically melts my heart. I love Katie.
Me too.
I just love that era for just how it was mixing all these weird ingredients. So for example, like DJ Craze, I remember at a certain point, he was very, very, very like influential in terms of like taking me out of the fold as well. Like I kind of opened for him a couple times being a drum and bass DJ and this and that and the other. So he, you know, was like mildly aware of me, but I think the moment that I was like, okay, who is this kid? You know, like he's got a little bit of buzz around him. What is this Baltimore shit? And then him and Clever kind of like took me under their wing, got me like represented by Denise. And then like, that was like a big, big, big deal.
Yeah.
And I just remember being like the weird kid from Maryland that was just like this music nerd that was like very, very sober at the time. So I think it was like a little off kilter at first, but like soon thereafter, it became a very family affair. Yeah.
This is another one at Studio B, or not Studio B, Santos.
I do remember this. Plant Music. Yeah. If I guess if we're talking about other people that have really helped kind of to break me out there, Stretch Armstrong, Plant Music, and Dom from the Glass were a big part of that too. Thanks for bringing that up. I remember when I first started, got an email from Stretch, like, I thought it was like one of my boys fucking with me. He's like, "Hey, I'm Stretch Armstrong," and I was like, "Oh yeah, the guy that like discovered like Wu-Tang and Redman and all these countless people is just going to email me for a record deal. Ha ha, motherfuckers." And anyways, it ended up being real. Obviously, ended up like doing so much for me. Like at one point, like he went over to Q-Tip's house and like recorded like custom vocals for us. I mean, like who in the hell can do that but Stretch? You know what I mean? Yeah. So just being a part of that was even such a magical moment, because what Stretch and Bobbito represent is this like, quintessential, just like fucking New York hip hop in its best, most purest form and its beautiful form. And then Dom from the Glass, just representing like much more of that sort of like the sort of dance rock, sort of like UK leaning, sort of like indie world. And it was just like, it just made complete sense somehow. The fact that those guys rode for me like that, the fact that we put out so many fun records for so long, like sharing that experience with Plant Music and then running TNA with Airs were like, it's just like, I can't even say enough good things about that crew,
When you were on the board, were you doing edits as well, or was it just your remix, right? You were uploading at like edits too, right?
For the most part, it's funny how like the bar of production has changed so much. It was like a lot of that time, it was mainly like bootleg remixes was a lot of it.
What other blogs were you on? I know you mentioned Disco Bell. Do you remember any of the others you regularly visited?
When I first started doing this, like I was like literally hauling records up and down the East Coast, and like I was doing it PayPal style. I was like tearing up pizza boxes and mailing them, and like I was really about that life, and was doing okay with it, to be honest with you. Like, it was keeping the lights on for sure. And then Turntable Lab kind of legitimized that a little bit. It was like, cool, let us, ride for you. Let us blog about this. Like, we like what you're doing with DJ Airs. Let us promote. I like the idea that then all of a sudden somebody would spend money on one of our mixes and press it with real art so that we could like hire somebody like Espo to fuck with it. And then like, it just like.
Who was pressing, who was helping you get those mixes out? Scion, I'm going to guess.
Scion eventually. Initially, it was just all DIY stuff.
Yeah.
And then Turntable Labs started off being like, cool, I'm gonna press them, and then I'm gonna send Turntable Lab X amount of records. And then it got to the point where Turntable Lab was like, no, this is good money. We'll take care of it. We'll manufacture for you. We'll help you distro. Just, promote our link instead of your own. And I was happy to do it at that time, because instead of cutting up pizza boxes, I was kind of getting on the road a bit more, I think launching into that moment, us doing like the last battle record for Ammo, A-Track's early imprint, was a good look for us. And, like the fact that, were you familiar with the record with the trap grooves?
No.
So the premise is if you basically had like a bunch of grooves on it, so you could just like drop the needle and it would like loop that infinitely. And then you could take two of them, and they had like a bunch of different Baltimore Club loops. You could take 4 turntables and then basically like sequence a song. You know what I mean? So this one would be like, watch out for the big girl would loop infinitely. This one would be a dick control beat. This one would be a bass line. So I saw like DJ Kink still uses that in his techno sets today. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it like jumped off to that. And then Scion Money happened, and they wrote for us. And there was just so many sort of like mutations of content.
I know we spoke about the different cities. Did you do Sloppy Seconds in Atlanta?
Did. Yeah, that was a fun one.
Were there any other cities that I'm missing? I mentioned the party. I'm sure they booked you.
Chicago was a good one.
Oh yeah.
Like Debo, Willie Joy, and all them. Well, I guess this ends up getting a little bit later, but like some of the border towns like McAllen were really good for me. But I think that was leaning a little bit more towards rave than club. But I mean, at that time, it was pretty like interchangeable to some degree. And then,
I played something with Kavinsky there, I think, and it was the kids went crazy. But that was like a little bit later on. Exactly.
And then I would put Buffalo in the same category of like border towns that jumped way the fuck off.
So when did UHall open?
UHall opened, what was it, 2010, I want to say. I had just been kind of like just mattress money, just kind of like going on tour and just like stuffing stuff into safety deposit boxes and things like that. And I remember just kind of having this moment of just being like, DC kind of hit like this weird funk where like all the warehouses that I kind of grew up on, where we talked about buzz and all that kind of stuff, had kind of gone belly up. And then like a lot of the rock bars, you know, like didn't really fuck with us, or like a lot of them didn't really necessarily have good sound systems. So anyways, like I just kind of had this moment and just kind of like connected with this team. I was like, how do you guys feel about this? And oddly enough, they had kind of already started the initiative. Like 2010 it opened. I was just turning 30 at that time. And I just remember just being like, we literally had to teach ourselves everything. Like all of a sudden I went from being a DJ to just being like, what the fuck is talent booking? Like, you know, like who the hell is Brad at Windish, you know? And just like really starting to like unravel that whole thing. And then after I'd say about 2 years time, like once it started to get like pretty cemented and things were doing pretty well and I got a decent reputation and got like kind of written up and whatnot. That's when basically Dave convinced me to move to LA, and that kind of started like a new chapter that would eventually land me in Oakland.
And you were booking everything at UHall, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, like part of the catalyst was, you know, when we first started, it was like, if there's no like dark underground sort of good sound system, no frills, no bottle service spots like to play. So we're going to fucking open one. So it kind of defeats the point of like going through that trouble and then booking a bunch of music you don't like, you know? So it was very, very important to us, whether it was like a really good indie dance party or a really good punk rock band, or, you know, booking like the Unruly Folks, or booking, you know, like, it's just like, we ran the gamut of the communities and the sounds that we were really fucking with at that time. But, you know, inevitably it was all over the map, but in some weird way felt like genuinely us, just like an inclusive sort of safe thing, you know? You get that, you know, you created like, you know, magic in New York before we did.
When you were throwing parties prior to UHall, did you book like Wes or Ayers or Cosmo, Brendan? Were you bringing other people to DC as well?
Yes. So the party that would introduce me to Dave, we called it Crunk with a K. That would eventually, towards like at the beginning of it, it was like mainly focused on just kind of like just being fun and local. But like Jerobi from Tribe would come through. We had like Camp Low randomly at one point. And then eventually it got to the point where it's like, oh, this thing has a reputation. Like real New York DJs want to play this shit. That's crazy. So like, I remember Cosmo Baker played his first Serato set of all time, you know, at the spot. And like, you know, Cosmo being Cosmo was incredibly critical about it, but like looked like he had been playing Serato sets for 20 years, you know what I mean? And that kind of springboarded into me doing a lot of shows at the 930 Club. And I remember like booking like DJ Assault for a record release party. Me and Nodistrom would like a lot of times like sell out the downstairs sort of portion on our own. And then that's kind of what like dovetailed into like, let's make our own spot. And then taking Moombahton Massive and putting that on blast was a big one. Giving respect back to the folks that like kind of tried to help us out, booking things like Unruly and things of that nature.
What years was Crunk happening?
Very early 2000s. So if I started touring in 2005, I would say my rough guess is probably 2002 or 3, because I remember Crunk was doing this thing and increasing. And then at a certain point, I was just like, so was touring and interest in my remixes. And I just remember just being like, this thing has run its course. I love it. But like, let's like leave it on a good note. You know what I mean? And I'm going to shift gears and get out of town more often. Yeah.
What songs personify that decade from 2000 to 2010?
I don't know about personify, but I would say like the first thing that came to my mind was like what Switch and Sinden were doing, to be honest with you, because you could tell they fucked with club music. Like those heavy overbearing dick control kicks were in there and the patterns were in there, and they were like cutting samples in a similar cadence and stuttering vocals. Like you could just tell that they like were a fan of that sound, but they were pushing it in directions that like just cats from Baltimore, like including, you know, myself being from Maryland, like just did not have the technical ability to accomplish. You know what I mean? I just remember like just like us treating that body of work like gospel. And every time, like I remember like, you know, hearing the Radio Clit remix that Switch and Sinden had done like for the first time at Good Vibes in Australia, and just seeing it decimate like 5,000 kids. And just, you know, like, especially at that time, like as somebody that was just doing fairly rudimentary like remixes, like it was just sonic wizardry to me. You know what I mean? It's like it was before you knew how to tune a kick drum. Like it was just like, what is this like witchcraft?
Any other wild stories, memories?
There was a South by Southwest that was particularly crazy. And don't get me wrong, there were more than one for sure. But there was this one that came to mind where it was like, and Beauty Bar was usually like the sort of like ground zero for that shit. And it was like Frankie got kicked out, dropped the line, Luca got kicked out. Dave Nada would eventually get kicked out, but not before he would physically try to fight our agent. Like, it was just absolutely absurd, the amount of like chaos that was happening. And I just remember, like, those were just the people that got kicked out. There was still like a rack of influential motherfuckers, like, still in a very tightly packed small beauty bar. And I just remember approaching, being like, what the fuck am I going to play? Like, literally everybody whose records I'm playing have already played them and are here. So I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to go back to what I know. And I just like played just like a very like just furious, unapologetic sort of like drum and bass set, just as hard as I could. Just like every 30 seconds, you drop. And I just remember picking my head up in 15 minutes, and just like the place was just going just absolutely ape shit.
Other favorite DJs of yours or artists?
I guess the first ones to come to mind, I guess if I had to like name it, would probably be like Unruly Records. Like, they like, I think, taught me and Dave like how to really run this shit. You know what I mean? And just kind of like how to stand for culture and do it the right way. You know, still get your bills paid and not like put up with any shit. Still kind of be encompassing and be open to a bunch of different types of music, and like span generations of support. You know what I mean? So I that was a really, really, really big one for me. As I'd mentioned too, like early on, like the Rub was a really, really big one for me as well. You know, Backyard Band, all things go-go were huge to me. Mm-hmm. Switch and Sinden that we had mentioned before. I grew up like on like a lot of Discord era bands. So like Hoover, Fugazi, Frodis, things of that nature. Hyphy was a big deal, like what we had mentioned earlier. New York rap was a huge deal for me, like Dipset, Nas, I mean, like everybody. Southern rap was huge. Project Pat, Outkast, UGK, Trillville.
I mean, you were able to tour off probably just the Hollerboard, like all of us were.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. No, it was pretty crazy. I mean, you look at kind of like everything that has tried to take or has successfully taken its place, and it wasn't as like bi-directional. So it's like you follow somebody on Instagram, and like, yeah, you might get a comment, you might get a like back, but like it's a fairly like binary process. It's just kind of like, you know, I don't know. It's not as inclusive. So like when I think of like the Hollerboard, and I think of like all the different personalities that were there, and the impact on like the trends that would set versus like for music still to today. Like if you look at kind of what West has done, and it's like Baltimore Club was like, correct me if I'm wrong, like 1.0 of West was like almost exclusively Baltimore. You know what I mean? And that kind of like inspired the MIA thing and the Switch thing. And then once they linked up with Switch, it was like, I know what Dave was doing with Moombahton. And like that became, you know, like in my opinion, like him inventing Moombahton, like you're looking at Major Lazer 1.0 right there. And, you know, Switch having produced a lot of that stuff and being in a lot of rooms with Nodastrom, it's like all that shit was like born from Holotronics. Yeah. And the fact that we could all kind of mix with each other in this way where we're not just like, it's not just likes and small comments and stuff like that. It's like literally like a lot of back and forth chatting where you get to know each other, maybe sometimes too well. There's a little bit of beef here and there too, right? But for the most part, it was like this like magical moment where it's just kind of like, yeah, if you put an EP up on Holotronics and it did well, like that'd be enough for you to like, you know, eat well that summer. Like you would, you know, tour a dozen or two cities off that alone. And then if Disco Bell syndicated it, you do the same in Europe. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was just a completely magical time. And I also think that especially as cats that were coming out of like, you know, suburban DC at that time, you know, before we had kind of like moved on to DC and LA and all these spots, like it was cool kind of seeing all these cultures mixed too. Yeah, it just became like this really kind of supportive family that like I think dictated musical trends up until now. We're talking decades later.
Yeah. Preach, Jesse, preach. I love it.
And then Afrojack, which without Afrojack, you wouldn't have had Moombahton, because like basically Dave fucking with Moomba by Afrojack created the genre.
Yeah.
Then as a result of that became influential to Major Lazer. So in a lot of ways, you know, like Afrojack plays this like really interesting role.
I feel like Chucky too. I mean, it's Chucky.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Chucky's still like in the mix for sure.
Yeah, because I think like Dutch House was that pivotal turning point also. Like, it's not just Afrojack USB, but it was that sound that was like so abrasive, so fun and silly, and kind of like was like, oh well, if you can do this with if this is what like EDM is going to be, then yeah, let me get on board.
It for me, it felt pretty genuine because I already liked the Switch and Sinden stuff, which was like the UK version, and then it was like the Dutch like do dance music very, very well. So it was like they took like the Crookers Sinden thing, and it was like their version of it, and it was like hard, and also had Baltimore Club kick patterns and like this giant percussion. So being an old raver and liking hood ass drums, like it made a lot of fucking sense for me, you know. And then like Laid Back Luke also at that point was a really, really big one. You know what I mean? He was it was pivotal, like all that sort of, in the way that you could play Bloghouse in those party rockin' sets, you definitely could play Dutch House. And like during that time, it was a little bit more Wild West. There could be a little bit more chances taken. If you had an interesting sound or you did a cool record with somebody big, like, you know, you could play a stage to thousands and thousands of people. It was like this magical moment where like, it was like, the creative shit kind of like had the mainstream outlet. And not to say you can't still find platforms and figure out a way to break through. Like, I don't want to be like, you know, like one of those dudes that feel that like, you know, perfection was attained in 2005. I'm totally not that dude. But like, just in terms of the like institutionalization of music, like there was just so much more leeway then, you know?
Yeah.
There are two more things that I remember I made a note to talk to you about. One, I have you to thank for introducing me to Azumi.
Yes.
I don't know. So like at a certain point, I don't know if you remember, I was like, yo, Rox, is your girl Zoom all right? I'm about to move into her. She's not fucking crazy, is she? Anyways, long story short, she's like driving up from LA and I'm gonna see her tonight. And like, it's just like this grand reunion. And we had like we love Roxy moment like earlier. And we're gonna send you a picture later. And Azumi has become like just an actual like sister for me. And we've been there for each other like for 20 years of up and down memories. And I have you to thank for that. So thank you for that introduction. And it's like hard for me to imagine life without her. So thank you.
Yay, I love that.
And then there was one more story. There's something about one of your events that you don't know. There was a time where it's like, you know, especially me being from Maryland, like I didn't know what the fuck a cabaret license was. So there was a moment where like not to paint the wrong picture here, like 99% of your parties were absolutely incredible. And even that last 1% I always enjoyed. But this one fit into that last 1% where like, I remember like in the middle of all that New York cabaret fuckery, like me and Dave were just kind of like doing our thing.
That was this one.
Was that the one?
Yes, Dave mentioned this as well.
I just remember at a certain point, it was like the lights came up and somebody, I think it was you just kind of like, yo, the cops are here. Like, you know, just like play it kind of cool. Like, it's all right. Maybe drop the volume a little bit or some shit like that. And I was like, all right, cool. Yeah, no problem. And I just remember at a certain point, like a really aggressive, I don't know if he was an owner, a GM, a manager, a lead bartender, whatever the fuck you want to call him. Right. Which is kind of like, just came up here. It's like, cut that shit now. And I was just kind of like, well, it's already pretty low, but I mean, we can take it from 25% to 15 if you want, you know? And then I remember like a little bit of time passed and it was kind of weird and wonky. And then he came up again. He's like, I thought I told you to turn that. I was like, do you want it off? He's like, I didn't say off. He's like, at a certain point, like he kept telling me to turn it down. And like, I didn't know what he meant. So at a certain point, I was like, I had cut the volume. I had lowered the pitch. I had dropped the tempo. I was like, I've literally, besides turning it off, I've cut it off in every which way possible. What do you want from me? And like somebody was trying to explain to me cabaret licenses. And I was like, wait, you have to pay what for what? Like, it just didn't compute to me. Right. And here I am like applying for cabaret licenses now. But like, obviously this was like, you know, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, some shit like that. It was just a really weird foreign concept. And I got kind of like hood for a second. I looked at Dave and Dave looked at me and I was like, yo, dog, we paid money to get here. We better get fucking paid. Like, I don't know these people. And I was like, all right, Dave, here's what we're going to do. It's like, I'm going to go talk and make sure that we get paid. And it's like, I'm going to put these CDJs in our bags. If they try to fuck with us, just bounce. So you were straight up. You know what I mean? We still got paid. You still treated us well. And, you know, it was just like a crazy blip in what New York is. You know, like it's something that we took like way personal and like, or I should say, I shouldn't speak for Dave. But like, yeah, we put the CDJs back. It was fine. So sorry for doing that.
I don't think I knew what was happening. So, and they
no, you didn't. And
anyway, after this, so this flyer for this party went on for this Friday night party went on for an entire summer really well. And then this night we had that issue, and then I moved it immediately the next week.
Got it.
So I wouldn't have cared if you stole their CDJs. And I hated the owner, and I took everything he said to me personally too. I hate him, Dave something, and I would like never put the name of the venue on the flyers. So I put it on.
I got it. Like the 217 Bowery shit.
Yeah, I wouldn't put. It was called Mission, and I would never put it on there. I hated him.
Me and Conrad talk about this era a lot. Conrad was just kind of like, yo, like I feel like kind of blessed that she even like interviewed me amongst like, you know, this story and the people that are involved with it. And I was like, Conrad, stop being so damn hard on yourself. It's like, you know, like Conrad was like part of the reason why Portland was even on the map. And, you know, like just our entry point into the crazy world of Portland and whatnot, and how hard he rode for club music. I mean, like Conrad to this day, like sometimes we will literally leave a popping club and sit in the car and talk about like Rod Lee for 2 hours. You know what I mean? And like, it's just, So anyways, thank you for being a part of that family. And thank you for everything that you've done for club music, like the launch off points for so many of us, and being a diplomat to like even learning what New York City was and is. And I just can't say enough nice things. And these reference points haven't like left me and Conrad and Dave. They continue to shape like what we do and what we try to push. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Awesome. I love to hear that.
Thanks for hopping by. That's it for this week. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, and stalk. Bounce, little kitty.